Okay, so I'm going to be doing John Donne's Air and Angels for my IOC. Um, so first I'd like to begin by introducing Donne's, the phases Donne has gone through in his poetic works. So first we see, in his earlier essays, we see examples of the irreverent Donne, who and then we continue to see the side of the religious Donne, and then finally the monogamous Donne. Sort of these the poetic his poetic styles sort of reflect the events that have gone that he has gone through in his life. So in Air and Angels, we see the irreverent Donne, because he sort of detaches himself from the responsibilities of loving a woman, and by saying that his love is too pure and too vast to be bound to a physical form, and therefore he cannot love love a woman in the way that in the conventional way that a man would love a woman. So the points I'd like to go through are diction, structure, and allusion. So first of all, with diction, in the first stanza, Donne uses a lot of words to describe the human love as being limited to affections of the human body. So first, the first evidence of that is take limbs of flesh in line 8, and once again in line 10, love must not be but take a body too. So here, and also, and fix itself in thy lip, eye, and brow. So in the first stanza, Donne gives love a physical form. He describes love as being limited or bound, or in this stanza, the word he uses is fixed to the physical characteristics of a woman, and thus to describe the superficial nature of perhaps the conventional love or human love. And then in stanza 2, we get an image of what Donne will of what Donne describes as the limitations of physical love. And so I think I'll be moving to allusion now rather than structure. So in the second stanza, we have this image of we actually see two images. One is of love sinking because of love sinking to the ground because of its of its admiration to the physical rather than to the spiritual. He uses words such as ballast and sink. A ballast sort of describes something that weighs down something. So, well, thus to ballast love, I thought. And then he goes on in the line after that with wares which would sink admiration. And then finally we see Donne gives us an image of what his love is like. To go back to the first image, he describes human love being bound to physical superficial appearances, and therefore describes it as sinking, and therefore a lower form of love than his. And then we continue to we continue to the next image of Donne's love, his sort of spiritual love. He says that he describes his love. He says that I had love's pinnace overfraught. So a pinnace is a ship, and so sort of that his idea of love escapes and sails away from this binding concept of human love. So it escapes the earthbound context, meaning it's not fixed to thy eye, to thy lip, eye, and brow. It is not fixed to the superficial appearances. And I guess the biggest illusion that Donne compares his love to is to that of an angel. If you think of if physically, angels are sort of floating spiritual humans, and sort of Donne uses angels to describe his love as love of a higher love on a higher level, and love on a spiritual level. He describes his love as not being sort of as being shapeless, as we see in line 3, as not taking on a physical form, but rather taking on a spiritual form, like what he says in the first three lines of the first stanza. Twice to thrice had I loved thee before I knew thy face or name, so in a voice, so in a shapeless flame. In those 3 lines, he describes his love as not being bound to a superficial and to a superficial physical form, but to a more spiritual and based on sort of the person's soul. And then and then we and then the last couple of lines in stanza 2, he explicitly compares it to an angel. So he says, then as an angel, face and wings of air not pure as it, yet pure doth wear. So thy love may be my love's sphere, just such disparity as it twixt airs and angels' purity, twixt humans' love and men's will ever be. In the last couple of lines, Donne gives a sort of a level of closure, or sort of finishes off the ideas of this poem by saying that if it is not spiritual, then it is not pure. And so even though I may love you, it cannot be translated to your kind of love. So he's sort of talking to the woman as if she's below him, that his love is so superior that he just can't love her in the way that she would want to be loved, in the way that she would want to be loved based on her lip and her eye and her brow. So he compares it as in between like air and angels purity. Men and women will always love in that way, will always be not pure in that way, and that air and angels are always pure in that way. And in conclusion, he describes his love as being too pure and too vast to be bound to a physical form. So, and sort of non-translatable, or he cannot bring himself down to that human, earthbound context of love. So I think sort of the structure sort of falls in place. We see in the first stanza, we see Donne talking about love taking on a physical form, so sort of human love or earthbound, or love in the earthbound context, and then he continues the second stanza to through allusion to describe it as to describe it as something sinking something else. So sort of that earthbound context, that sort of characteristic of human love is sort of it sinks, and it's on a lower level than his spiritual love, and then finally he comes to the conclusion that his love is too pure and too spiritual to be bound to a physical form. So in conclusion, Donne makes the contrast between earthly and heavenly love. He makes his distinction through he describes earthly love through diction, by describing sort of human, associating with human parts like flesh and body and lip, eye, and brow, and then heavenly love by describing it to air and angels. So he creates this contrast by describing the boundless, the binding aspects of human love, of earthly love, versus the sort of the boundless and boundless characteristic of earthly love. Okay, so I think I'll move on to the general discussion questions. So number 1, while teaching a stone to talk is clearly a collection of individual essays that can stand on their own, to what extent do you feel there is a rationale behind their order within this collection? To what extent does Dillard's first essay serve as an introduction to ideas explored in the full body of essays? To what extent does the final essay offer a level of closure to the collection? Okay, so teaching a stone to talk, the collection of essays, not the individual essay, is describes a spiritual and physical journey to this to finding God in I guess perhaps there isn't a specific order like it goes in like in numerical order, but rather in sort of logical order, perhaps. Like for example, in the first essay, we see sort of in each essay there's sort of a different a conflict. So perhaps one of them is like man versus, I think the 3 different ones are man versus man, man versus society and man versus himself. So in the first group of essays, Dillard talks about man versus not society but rather the environment. Like for example, in Teaching a Stone to Talk, talks about sort of the man versus the silence of nature and how it's that tension between those two forces. And then we continue to talk about man versus man. For example, in can't remember the title of the essay, but it was the one where a boy finds Dillard and starts talking to her, and then she realizes that she has talked to his mother before, and she asked him, "Is God your savior?" So, sort of, there's that tension between man versus man, and sort of the idea of collective and solitary practices of religion. And then there's finally what we see in Aces and Eights, which is man versus himself. So we sort of see like we go from the general to the more we go from a group of individuals to just the conflict between one individual, which is eventually becomes herself. And so in Aces and Eights, in Aces and Eights, she talks about how sort of the passing of time and it sort of offers a level of closure to the collection by sort of she has a level of understanding which her earlier essay sort of question. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the second question. Who would you say is Dillard's audience for this collection of essays? What relationship does Dillard's essays establish between the speaker and the reader? So I think that Dillard's audience is pretty broad in general. Not necessarily is it only for religious people, because she does not only focus on religion as a whole. Even like she talks about how God, it's not like we're not doing this for God but for ourselves. And so I think it's to people as a whole, regardless of their religion. Even though she has a bunch of allusions to the Bible, but yet again she has a lot of allusions to the Quran and the Torah. So what relationship do Dillard's essays establish between the speaker and the reader? I don't think she actually goes beyond the page to actually connect with the reader, but rather she tries to use a series of allusions and whatnot for the reader to establish a relationship with the speaker, sort of to put the reader in the speaker's position and sort of to see through her eyes what she is seeing. And then finally in number 3, Annie Dillard was a poet before she was a writer of prose. To what extent does Dillard employ poesy in her prose essays? What common elements of poetic style do you find she uses most often? What is her effect on the larger meaning of her essays? Try to ground your answers in specific examples. Okay, 30 seconds. Real quickly, so Dillard uses alliteration, allusion, sensory imagery, thing, and structure, sort of to create to establish some sort of there is something poetic in her understanding of the world and of God. And finally, she uses these poetic elements to establish that, to create a sense of sort of a flow in her essays, and also to create a, and also, yeah. And so, for example, I think it's, can't remember the name of the essay, but is it Sojourner, that she uses a lot of S sounds to create that sort of, that long consonant sound to create a sense of longing, if I'm not sure. But in general, Annie Dillard uses uses alliteration and sensory image to sort of an allusion to, like, once again, to create and to establish a relationship between the reader and the speaker, and to create a sense of flow. And yeah. Okay, that is my IOC. Thank you.